The Set Free Radio Show. Truth music for East Texas.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Set Free Radio. Truth music for East Texas.
This all I know. I pull up, I'm heavy, they looking, they checking, they asking, they questions. I get them their blessings, I'm teaching them lessons, believing in prayers. I pull up, I'm heavy, they looking, they checking, they asking, they questions. I get them their blessings, I'm teaching them lessons, believing in prayers. Could've been a baller, but instead I gave it to the head of my life, who came in when the chains went around my head, heavy with the weights of this life. I mean, we here to pull them out for, kick a demon out for, take away they doubts for, help them realize that a life dedicated to Christ can get them right if they cry out. This all I know.
Welcome to Set Free Radio. I am your brother Justin, and this is where we like to try to positively impact our community and social media with the hope of Jesus Christ through Christian rap and conversation. So we have a special guest here today. We have Mr. J. Werner Wallace. And man, I'm super excited, to have him here. He's a best-selling author. He's got 6 books out now, I think.
But more than I care to count.
More than you care to count. Yeah. He got a bunch of books out. He's a Dateline featured cold case detective. He's been on, Dateline more than any other detective.
That's true.
And he's also an apologist. He's a speaker. He tours around, the country, and just kind of he's a Christian casemaker.
That's right.
And provides, evidential support, for the Bible, for Christianity. So. Super excited to have him here, and if you just take a second right quick while we're on, just to go ahead and just tell them how they can find you on, Facebook and, social media, your website, your podcast.
Yeah, we have a website at coldcasechristianity.com, and there are social media links are there at the website, but you can find me at J. Werner Wallace on Twitter, same handle, J. Werner Wallace on Facebook and on Instagram. So yeah, I'd be happy to connect with you after you reach out to me on social media.
Yes, sir. And also Set Free Radio, man, y'all check us out. We are on all, social media platforms. Find us on YouTube. We're on there. We're trying to get our subscribers up, and so, definitely appreciate Jim for coming on, to our humble podcast radio shows. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook Live. We go live every Monday at 7 p.m. So
That's awesome.
If you're watching this, go ahead and give us a like, give us a share, subscribe to us on YouTube. And we're going to go ahead and take a quick break right quick, and we'll be right back with Mr. Wallace here, and we'll get this thing going.
All right.
All right, y'all, we're back. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. Like I said, hopefully you liked it, like this, shared it, tag some people. Go ahead and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. And we're back with Mr. J. Werner Wallace. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Glad to be here.
And I'm just so excited because, I really feel like it's a God thing that, I was able to even connect with him because, it just so happened to catch a post online where, where you were needing like people to help with the book launch of Person of Interest.
Right.
And then being able to be on there, and it's like I was reading the first couple pages of Person of Interest, and I saw, where you were talking about you were, you were at the Books a Million.
Books a Million, right up the street here.
So literally right around the corner. So that just blew my mind, and I was
That's how long Books a Million has been there,
yes,
right?
a long time. You know what I'm saying?
And we were having it that China King right next door is where we were eating.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been this has been a part of my journey, this part of Texas. Yeah. So I was glad to come back and join you.
Oh man, it's awesome, and just being able to reach out on Zoom and to find out your family lives around here, so that's a great thing. So I truly feel like God has definitely allowed us to be able to get you here and have you come speak for us, man. And so just in saying that, I just kind of wanted to, in case the people are not familiar yet with you, like just kind of give them a little brief, a little bit about your testimony or your background and kind of.
Sure. So I was raised, this has always been home to us in the sense my dad was born here in Hughes Springs, Texas, right about 40 minutes away, and this was always the place we would come on vacation with my family.
Which is why, vacation.
Yes, it is. And people used to always say, where are you from? We say, well, we're from Southern California. And like by the beach? Yeah. I said, what are you guys doing here? Yeah. Well, because this is really where our family was, and we love Piney Woods in Northeast Texas, and so you just can't beat this place. So we would always come here for a month every summer. And that's when I first started coming here. I was younger, and I was not a Christian until I was 35. So there's a big chunk of time when I was coming to Northeast Texas where I was not a believer. And my family here were, I think that, my dad for sure, I've got some in-laws now who attend church, but I just wasn't raised around the church.
Yeah.
I wasn't raised around anyone who was a believer. And so I was not interested in Christianity. And the few police officers I knew who were Christians really were not gifted in terms of communicating why Christianity was true. So when I first got interested in the Bible, I just examined it the way I would examine any set of witness statements. And so I slowly just kind of worked through those Gospels and tested them. And there's a principle that we use to test eyewitness accounts that we actually have instructions for jurors. And I used those jury instructions to examine the Gospels, and that's really how I became a Christian to begin with.
Yeah.
So a lot of my journey is evidential, right? It's using the evidence to determine if Christianity is true.
Yeah, and that's awesome because, like you said, a good majority of believers, we have maybe like an experience, or we've been to church, or even have a born again experience, but it's a lot of times it's walking by faith, but it's not so much.
Sure. And I think it's not an either or. I mean, I think every one of us is wired somewhat differently, right? And some of us are going to be wired where you could examine all that evidence and it wouldn't move you because you're waiting for an experience. Some of us are wired where we don't even need any of that. God reaches people in different ways.
Yes.
But for people like me, and I think we're in a culture where there are a lot of, especially young people, who are being told that you got to follow the science. And it's evidence-based, data-driven stuff. And you guys who are Christians, you seem to ignore that stuff. That's their claim.
Yeah, exactly.
So we want to be able to say, well, actually, no, you can come in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I've always wondered, does anybody, say, that sounds like kind of like Lee Strobel, like you're the Lee Strobel.
Yeah, and Lee has been a very, very dear brother. I mean, when I first thought about this idea, I met Lee once at a conference, and how many times do you meet somebody at a conference? But no, when I reached out to him to say, hey, would you be willing to help me? Maybe would you be willing to endorse a book if I write one? Yeah. He right away came back and said, well, would you like me to write the foreword? And so when Lee Strobel tells you he'll write, but we have a kind of a kindred spirit, right? He's an investigative journalist, so he's reporting on the kinds of cases that I'm generally working, and so we are sometimes in the courtroom. They are investigative journalists in the courtroom sometimes with you. So a lot of my experience gets reported by people like Lee.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of his kind of like the book or the movie, Case for Christ.
Yes.
He was writing about crime stories and stuff. So.
Yes, and I just think it's amazing how God has used Lee to reach an entire, millions of people with the gospel. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's good, man. God is good, and and I definitely, with my walk, like I said, I wasn't, a believer until I was like 32, 33. And it took kind of like the worst pain in my life that I went through, to where, I cried out to Jesus and, he gave me peace. So I had kind of that experience, but I had always been kind of skeptical about different stuff. I didn't grow up in the church either. So one of the things is I had that experience, but I decided to give my life to Christ, decided to, make this walk or whatever. And
look at all the stuff you're doing now.
Exactly.
Trying to communicate Jesus.
And, a big part of that what's helped me with my faith, because I remember struggling a lot. I used to always sing for the guy that brought his son to Jesus, I believe, but help my unbelief.
Yes.
And apologetics, to me, a lot has helped me to boost my faith to where it makes me even more bold with my faith,
Yes.
And, I even had an experience like to where I was, kind of just checking stuff out. There was an article on Facebook, and it was about, historians disprove Jesus because of something. And I was like, I don't want to click that because if I do, it's going to give me some doubts. It's going to hurt. You know what I'm saying? But I actually clicked on it and read it. And what blew me away is that it was so like horribly written. It was just complete garbage. And that actually built my faith up because I'm like, well, Jesus has to be who he says he was, because why is everybody attacking Jesus?
Yeah, there's this reason why he makes more impact and that impact is sometimes because people will put their faith in him, and sometimes it's because people will resist, and they end up amplifying the name of Jesus in their resistance. So it's pretty cool.
I'll say the subject of doubts and stuff just kind of closes up. Is there anything, in this walk that you've had, like your biggest maybe doubt or struggle that you've had to kind of work through?
I think my biggest issue coming in was that I was just so committed as what people know as a philosophical naturalist, this idea that you don't need anything supernatural or miraculous to explain the world the way it is. I was somebody who believed that wherever we had an open question about how the world works or how the universe came into being or whatever it may be, that if we wait long enough, the science will help us to determine. You don't need to infer the existence of a God to explain something that we can eventually explain through space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry. So I think that was the biggest challenge for me, was trying to overcome this view of the world that did not require, I would have said, if you insert God into any scientific exploration, you no longer are doing science. If you insert God into any historical investigation, you're no longer doing history. I would have said these are things that are purely limited to fiction and mythology, and so that was what I had to overcome personally in order to get to where I am now.
Okay, and like you said, it's just awesome to see everything that the Lord has used you for, man.
That's
so
right.
That's awesome. So we're gonna take a quick little break. We're gonna listen to some dope music. We got a dope interview, so y'all stay tuned. We will be right back. Don't go nowhere. Keep it tuned in. We'll be right back. All right, y'all, we're back. Appreciate it. Staying tuned, getting back on to us, man. We do have Mr. J. Warner Wallace here. Been fortunate enough to get an interview with him. We have him come here to speak for us. So we just want to talk about the newest book, Person of Interest. You can see it right there. We got it. Very awesome book, man. It's very dope. I'm very blessed that I was able to kind of read it.
You're the book launcher.
During,
That's right.
During the
awesome.
test run, so it was.
Awesome.
It's been a very awesome book, man. It's very neat the way you approached it, even. And I guess the first question I have about the book is that because having read Cold Case Christianity before, it seems like Cold Case Christianity was focused on making the case for the most part. And that this kind of involves also your testimony too. So
and part of that is because for years people would ask me about that, and I was always hesitant to say much about, because unfortunately, the truth is that my testimony is that crazy investigation that was in Cold Case. But no one ever thinks of that as a testimony. They think, well, no, but we want to know kind of like, what is your spiritual journey? What was it? Where did God bring you to? What experience? It's about basic experiences. People want to know, what was the experience that demonstrated it was true for you? And I thought, well, it wasn't an experience. It was an investigation. And I don't know how else to say it. But what I tried to do in Person of Interest was kind of show you how this unwrapped. And so that was part of what I'm doing. But also, I'm trying to make an out. So there's two forms of evidence you use when you do criminal trials. And when I was doing Cold Case, I was looking at everything that was inside the New Testament. Why do we trust that New Testament is reliable? But anytime you have a crime scene, you're not just working with the evidence in the crime scene, you're often working with the evidence that's outside the crime scene. Some domino that got tripped over that ends up tripping a domino out over there. Well, I'm going to look at all that stuff when I make the case. So Person of Interest takes a kind of an opposite view of Cold Case. Cold Case looks at what's in the Gospels. Person of Interest looks at what's outside the Gospels. And that case, the inside and outside case, is really what compelled me to believe this was true. And it's a long process, right? Because to build that case, even if you work at it every day, it's going to take months just to get to a place where you feel like you have what I always call like a blogger's ability to recall it, to communicate it. Now, this is not like an academic's ability to communicate it, but when you're really trying to convince yourself, or convince yourself it isn't true, just trying to either bring it in or take it off the list, you just need to you'll know pretty quickly. I don't need to have necessarily an academic's view to have enough information to make a decision. And so what we do with Person of Interest is I have a strategy. I use all the same strategy in every no-body murder case where someone kills their business partner or they kill their loved one, and then they get rid of the body and they say, I don't know what happened to her. She just got mad. She had an argument and she left. And then 30 years goes by and we don't have any photographs from a crime scene because it was never even taken as a murder. Initially, it was a missing persons. And even if you got wise to it in the first month, well, you're a month behind the murder scene. And so now you have this mess. And so without anything in the crime scene, how do you determine what happened on the day that she went missing? I always say, well, if she was murdered, that was an explosive event. But all bombs have a fuse that burn up to the detonation of the bomb, and then you have all this blast radius junk everywhere. And so we're going to make the case from the fuse and the fallout. I'll tell, even if I have nothing from the crime scene, I can make a case from the fuse and the fallout. And that's what we do in Person of Interest. What we're trying to do is say, hey, if they had utterly destroyed every New Testament document, well, it turns out you're not going to get rid of Jesus because you can completely reconstruct the Jesus story just from the fuse and fallout of history. And then you got to ask yourself the question, and that, by the way, cannot be done for any other historical figure. So the question becomes then, why? Why does this guy have that kind of impact? And then from that impact, you can completely reconstruct his story. That's like crazy. Why would that be the case? So That's really what the book tries to do.
Yes, it's a very awesome way to look at it, and even the way you tied in the case,
Yeah, I tried to do retail or murder. And I'll tell you something about that. I learned something. So when I did Cold Case, I would tell a little detective story in every chapter, but they weren't related. They were just little, 2-paragraph, 3-paragraph stories. And I thought that just kind of helps people to see, oh yeah, that's how it works in a case. Here's how it works with Jesus. But this time, I learned something from doing kids' books, because I did 3 kids' books.
Yes.
I learned something from those kids' books that was interesting. Kids would tell me that, oh yeah, I wanted to read it right away. I wanted to read the whole thing. Well, that's because in the kids' books, I'd have a mystery.
You want the whole,
And it would be over 10 chapters.
Yep.
And you would have to go through each chapter to solve the mystery. And so even though they probably weren't even interested in the case for Jesus, they wanted to see what was in that box, or where'd that dog come from, whatever mystery I put in there.
Yeah.
So in this book, I just decided to tell a story of one case over 10 chapters.
Yes.
And so I think the next book I might do something very similar because I think that ended up being popular.
Oh yeah, and then like you said, you're learning about Jesus, but you're also at the same
you
time
want to see how did he convict us? Yeah.
So that's a very cool thing. Would you call this maybe a prequel to Cold Case Christianity?
Yeah. So people ask me, well, how did you become well? It's actually captured in 3 books. It's Cold Case Christianity, and that got me to a place where I had to rethink my presuppositions about God's existence. So then I started thinking, well, okay, but this would require God. This would require something divine, and I reject that. And why am I rejecting that? So I found myself then looking at the evidence that I wrote in another book called God's Crime Scene.
Yes.
So really, for me, that 9-month period was God's Crime Scene, Cold Case Christianity, and Person of Interest, all in one 9-month period.
Yeah.
And when I first started writing books, I would offer the publishers, which of these do you want to go? The first publishers said, well, we'll start with Cold Case. But if you think about it, if there's no God, then there's no Christian God. So if you looked at it sequentially, you'd probably start with the case for God rather than the case for the gospel or reliability. But for me, it was it was not as clean as that. When you start looking at Christianity, you probably felt the same way. You start having questions, and they're in weird niches. And then you need an answer to that weird niche question before you can go on. But you might think, well, why do you need that? This isn't even related. It's something over here. Well, yeah, but it's just the way your mind thinks. So you end up, I rabbit trailed a bunch of stuff, right? It wasn't a clean, like, oh, I'm going to knock over this, then I'm going to knock over that. No, I'd get 2 steps in, and I'd go, oh, rabbit, come back. Oh, rabbit, come back. So I kind of like the squirrel on Up, that movie where the dog is constantly squirrel. That's how you kind of feel when you do this work.
Yes, and I agree with you.
And you got to chase those rabbits until you run them out.
And there's a bunch on the chase.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, and so like personal interest, it basically, I remember reading the interview or hearing the interview, you were saying that a large part of the reason why it was wrote was because of the COVID lockdown.
I had no idea how much work it was going to be to make what is my blogger's ability. So I'd already looked at all this stuff years ago, and I had some notes, and I had some, but I didn't keep everything I should have, and I didn't know I'd be writing a book about it 24 years later. So I didn't keep it all, and then a lot of stuff kind of got updated. So I want to make sure I have updated stuff. So to turn kind of a blogger level understanding of certain topics into a referenced, footnoted.
Bunch of references.
I needed some help. I got 2. So I had 2 research assistants, and I could tell them, okay, here's where I got it from before. Just go back. I need it to be now footnoted though, so I need to find out. Like I think it's going to be over here, and they helped me to find my sources again and footnote all those sources, and that was really helpful because it turns out that there's about 50 pages of footnotes in this book. Printed version.
Yes.
And I think that's, if people want to read that, great, but you don't have to read that to get the book to work. But then there's another 270 in a PDF file offline, because I just knew that I wanted to empty it out. If you thought, well, how? Because we're doing some crazy stuff in this book. One of the things we're doing, for example, is seeing the impact of Jesus of Nazareth on scientists. Well, we have 950 scientists we looked at as a group, and then you're reading through all of their statements about Jesus, their work. Well, that's a lot of data, and I'm not going to put that in the book. It'll bore you to tears. I want to be able to summarize it in the book. Look at it this way. When you do a criminal trial in front of a jury, you present data, facts, for like 10 weeks, and then you're done. You do a 4-hour closing argument. Well, you're not presenting the whole 10 weeks worth of stuff again. You're summarizing it into 4 hours. So a book sometimes is like your closing argument, but it stands on 10 weeks worth of evidence you showed the jury. Well, where's that evidence? It's in the footnotes.
Yeah.
So that's what we had to do for this book. And if it hadn't been for COVID, I can tell you, I would not have had the time.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't traveling. They canceled all the travel events. So I was home, and I was able to every day just get up and sit in the living room in front of a fire and bang out the resources. So it's pretty cool.
And it just, I think, kind of speaks to, just even as bad as COVID was and everything that happened, God works good out of everything.
Yeah,
so.
and I think that, and we kind of get a sense that, like you even said in your own personal story, that sometimes it's dark spots in your journey that end up pointing you. You don't sometimes look up until you're standing at the bottom. So
exactly. I mean, you're knocked off the horse like Paul,
That's right. That's exactly right.
Exactly. Well, let me see. Let me ask what was the most surprising thing you found in your research?
I thought always the science. That's why I did a whole chapter on science, because when I was first looking at this 20 some odd years ago, I was the guy who would have said that these Christians are anti-science and they're anti-education. So those two chapters, education and science, in the book, I just thought that was the most surprising thing. I guess, I went to UCLA, and by the time I was at UCLA, it was not a Christian-friendly campus. It wasn't even a conservative-friendly campus, and so I was surprised to find how much of like the UC system. You'd be surprised to see how many university systems in America and globally were founded by Christ followers, even though today they would reject Jesus. So that's part of what I want to write about too.
That's good. Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of, because one thing that kind of tripped me up, or was tripping me up earlier on, because I remember reading Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, because sometimes I guess the whole zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist. Yeah.
Yes.
Spirit of the age.
Yeah, and they get to talk about there's all these different deities.
The movie. Jesus. Oh, absolutely.
And so I think that's one of the things that kind of troubled me. But even C.S. Lewis said that it's kind of something you touched on, the fact that all these, that any similarities there were kind of points to Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Rather than
why would they be similar? That's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight at the presentation we're doing here. So, I think that is, and that never bothered me, right? Well, a lot of it was because as you examine the similarities, they're not that similar. So there's some things you're thinking, to be honest, I would have hoped they were more similar because I wanted to. That would be intriguing, right? Like, how could that be? Either you discover something false about Jesus, or something false about the other God. You discover something though. Yeah. But it turns out as you examine these, they are not as similar as they would have you believe.
Exactly.
But there are some overarching similarities that we need to talk about and ask the question, why are these similar in all of these ancient mythologies? So anyway.
And then I think that speaks also to like the strenuous research and footnotes in this, because you have the evidence to a lot of stuff like the zeitgeist and a lot of the memes.
There was another movie called The God Who Wasn't There.
Really? Okay.
Kind of a similar one too. This idea that there are other dying and rising saviors. There are other saviors that are born of virgins. All these things that are just borrowed allegedly by the gospel authors.
They don't have any first source.
Yeah, I know. So, but if you really go back, and the one that got me the most interested was Mithras, a deity from Persia, and because sometimes this would be like they make him sound so similar to Jesus, and then as you research it, you realize, wow, this is kind of like all mythologies. You have to really stretch the Mithras story to get him to look like Jesus in any way.
And that's I think that's the importance of like researching everything for yourself, because there's so much information on the internet. You don't want to just take anything for what it says. You want to go out there and research it. Look at both sides, the Christian side and the the secular side.
I do think we're at a crisis right now of trust. Like if young people thought about, they want to know something about Jesus, I don't know, who would they trust online? You almost feel like you can get polar opposite explanations for any issue, politically, religiously, whatever, depending on which news source you go to.
Yeah, that's true.
So then the question becomes, and both seem equally authoritative, so how do you know which of these to trust, right? And you can't trust my pastor. He's got skin in the game. He wants me to be a Christian. He wants me to tithe to his church. Whatever it may be. I've heard them all. So that is part of the challenge, is how do you, but rest assured, even in a criminal trial, in a criminal case, there is a fact set available. And it's true, the way I present it may be different than the way the defense attorney presents the exact same data. But the jury can return to the data.
Yeah.
So what we have to be able to help people do is to return. That's why you put footnotes, case notes in a book.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, I would highly suggest if you haven't checked the book out, man, it's awesome. It's available everywhere you can get a book at, and like I said, on top of that, you get that book with the footnotes, all the drawings that,
That's
that
right.
you hand drew yourself.
I gotta see if it's at Books A Million. I hope it's there.
Yeah.
Since we're here.
Yeah,
There's no
gotcha.
Books A Million where I'm at, by the way. This is
Okay.
the only one I've ever known, because it's the only one I've ever been to in Longview.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So-
I went up there to try to get my flyer for the event. The manager wasn't there, so I left it. But I didn't,
Oh, that's
I was like,
funny.
he mentioned it.
I mentioned his business for crying out
I
loud.
gave him a shout out and everything.
All
so.
right, that's okay.
But so definitely check it out. Not only do you get the book, you get the footnotes, you get the PDF, you
And I've
get
got PowerPoints,
Yes, a bunch
videos,
of
all that stuff comes
So
with it.
it's a very awesome book. So we're gonna take a quick little break right there. We're gonna play some more music, and then we're gonna come back and wrap this thing up. And we will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. All right, y'all. Appreciate everybody being tuned in. This is the interview with Set Free Radio and J. Warner Wallace here. Best-selling author, cold case detective, Dateline featured, Christian apologist. He's got a lot of wears many hats.
Well, I'm glad to be at least visiting
Yes.
Northeast Texas.
Yes,
That's
yes.
basically the heart of the country,
Man.
Northeast Texas.
Yes, the
I
cold
don't
heart
think people
today.
understand what Northeast Texas is. You tell them you're going to go to Texas. They've got a view.
Oh yeah,
Even like a
it's
geographic,
Alabama.
yeah, even how it's going to look, geographically. But this is the piney woods
Yes.
kind of green side, probably more like Louisiana in some ways, maybe. I don't know, but it certainly is pretty here.
Yeah, it's a nice spot, and
It
this is the whole thing.
And it's not humid here in the summer, and it's not bush. My sons are still, the first time our kids when they were small ever saw a cicada,
Oh, yeah.
that was enough. Yeah, I think we got them to come back though for years.
Gigantic mosquitoes and all that
Oh yeah,
stuff.
all that stuff. At
Yes.
least you can feel them landing on you, so they try to
Yeah.
carry you away. So that's good. So.
Right. That's right. And this Texas weather, we're at
That's
70
right.
degrees one day and
I know it was
sunny the
76 degrees yesterday, and it was 39 today.
Yes.
Yeah,
big snowflakes and everything. So
yeah.
But just to wrap everything up, man, I just wanted to, because like I said, I understand the importance of apologetics.
Yeah, right.
And, there's a very good quote you have where you talk about $1 apologists.
Yeah.
Rather than have $1 million apologists, have a bunch of $1
Yes.
apologists.
Yes.
And I think that speaks to a lot of kind of our just everyday Christians. Our kind of responsibility. Part of the Great Commission, and to make a case for sharing our faith, because if you're actually actively out there sharing your faith, you're going to face opposition. You're going to have to be prepared. You're going to have to be ready.
Yeah.
And so just kind of
When I first I used to say this all the time before I ever wrote books, back when I was working as a detective and serving on youth ministries. And I thought, we don't need another $1 million apologist, because there's a sense like, I could never
Be that,
do
yeah.
that. I don't write books. I don't have a website. Back in those days, there was no one really doing anything on YouTube. So it was kind of like, I just, in order to break it as $1 million, like you got to be like Lee Strobel or C.S. Lewis. And I used to tell people, we don't need another $1 million apologist. We need $1 million $1 apologist. And that's the way I still see myself. That's the way all of us who are in the church, Christ followers, we need to embrace. This is not an option.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us feel like, we should communicate the gospel more than we do, because we feel that Great Commission burden, and we feel like, hey, that we're called to be evangelists. But the reality of it is that Paul says in Ephesians 4, it's actually, not everybody is an evangelist or a pastor or a teacher. He says some of you are, some of you are, some of you are. But that means some of us aren't.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily maybe how you're gifted, or what the call on God has in your life is to be an evangelist. But Peter doesn't give us that option, right? In 1 Peter 3, he says, hey, all of us are to be able to give the reason for the hope we have in Jesus. And it's going to be different for many people. For a lot of us who are watching this, it may just be your personal experience. But remember that pretty much everyone who believes in God in some form can say they've had an experience that confirmed for them that God is good. So my Mormon family would tell you that they've had an experience, or they were raised in the church. The two most popular answers that Christians give. I've had an experience, or I was raised in the church. So if all of us can do that, Muslims, Mormons, every group can do this, then what would separate us? Like, how do you know your experience and your church is teaching truth? Well, that's where the evidence is really helpful. It doesn't just, confirm that yes, your experience is valid, but it also can help you guard yourself from false experiences that are not grounded in the truth. So that's why I think it's important, and that's why in the first book I wanted to use that $1 million expression, the $1 million apologist, but my literary agent said, no, you're nobody. You can't come out and make it sound like you're criticizing somebody's. And I thought, that's not how I mean it. I don't mean like people are actually making $1 million as an apologist. Trust me, no one's doing that. But it was really more about the value that the church sees. And so I didn't say it in cold case. I didn't write it until I got to forensic faith. Because then I was able to say some things I couldn't say before. But the reality of it is we have to make a decision to do more than just trust Christ. We have to make a second decision to be able to defend Christ in a culture. And look, we're in the South right now. And the experience we're having in Northeast Texas is probably different than the experience I have in Los Angeles County. So that, to me, is a very unchurched environment where there's not a tradition. And this is how I could grow up and never know anybody in my family or in my friend set that were Christians, because that's kind of the culture I was living in. So I think it's going to be a different challenge. But as soon as you end up out now on social media, so it turns out that we are no longer kind of a global community in the sense that you have a reach that's well beyond Northeast Texas. So, and we all do. So then the question becomes, okay, well, what are the new challenges? I actually think that now is the time for us to be able to defend why this is true, because we are going to hold to some very unpopular moral teaching. And this moral teaching is going to be so unpopular that at some point someone's going to say, why are you such an idiot that you would believe such nonsense? Or you might question yourself, why do I hold on to these when everything in the culture is telling me that I need to abandon this view and that view and this? Well, that's where I think apologetics can help you stand tall.
That's good, and that kind of even ties into kind of what I was wanting to talk about with, because another one of my favorite apologists is Beckett Cook.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
With him.
Yes.
And I really liked how you brought up the fact that both of y'all have become Christians late. That's right. Late in your age, kind of like me. And it really speaks to me because not having just necessarily grown up in the church, but having that experience with Jesus and being born again, it's like you appreciate it so much more.
No, that's very true. I mean, you don't take it for granted. It's kind of like if you were raised. I love Thai food, right? So we have a lot of Thai food in Southern California because that's how close we are to the Pacific, and so Thai food is huge there, and I love it. But I didn't discover it until I was probably 40, maybe. Maybe I was my 20s when I first tasted it. But man, I loved it. By the time I was 40, it was a regular part of our going out to dinner. And I thought, if I was raised, if this was like if my parents made this for me, I probably wouldn't even appreciate this, right? Exactly. But because I didn't discover it, and it's still rare for me, I only get it maybe once a month, right? It still is like, wow, it has this special thing for me. Well, I think that when you come into the church late, because you lived your whole life without it, that you don't take any minute of it for granted. Exactly. And so that's why we have to kind of help ourselves to recognize. So maybe for a lot of people who were raised in the church but never looked at it evidentially, this is a way to jumpstart, to see it anew in a way you've never thought of it before, that might just reinvigorate the way you see your faith.
And and it just leads to you, a lot of times I've experienced like you talked about, it's just you want to tell everybody about it.
That's right. I just discovered this crazy thing. Look at this little thing I discovered. So when's the last time you discovered something about Jesus that you couldn't wait to tell somebody else? That's good. That's a very good point.
That's good. And if you get that book, you'll have plenty of, I promise you.
Well, that's great.
Or any of the other books, Cold Case Christianity, Forensic Faith. And it's very good information. And like I said, even in my own testimony, it's almost like coming out of the Matrix, like seeing this whole world with a different worldview, and it's just things that you thought were good were not good, are not actually good. The things you thought were important are not really important.
Right, and stuff that you've walked by your whole life and never associated God with that at all. And suddenly you realize, actually that makes total sense. So if Christianity is true and the Bible is true, then it should describe the world the way it really is. Exactly. And if it does, we're going to discover things we had never seen before.
And it makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely, and having children, that's when I'm able to kind of, pour into them.
So how old, did you have kids when you first became a Christian?
No, my daughter was probably 7 or 8, and my son was maybe about 4 or 5.
So you were already a parent, but you weren't a Christian yet.
Yes.
I think that's so interesting, because that was true for me too. And I wonder if that is another way that God helps us to see, because
Exactly.
the relationship, the father to creation, creator to creation relationship is clearer once you become a father.
Yes.
And you understand, well, yeah, that this is why so many of the parables of Jesus, the prodigal son, all these things that use a father in a way to even describing God as the Father, it's helpful. And I think that's why, so for some of us, I tell a lot of people who are like, oh, my son, he's not a Christian, he was raised in the church, but he's not a Christian. I always say, well, has he got kids yet? Because it might just be that God uses some of that experience to soften us so that we'll kind of hear this truth.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're right. Like, I learned stuff from about God from just how I feel about my kids and from the love I see them showing.
Right. So the atheist in me would have said, well, yeah, that's why you believe in God, because you just happen to be taking and projecting your view as a father on. But it might just be because there's times when you're communicating to your kids and you are using analogies you think your kids will understand, so they grab the concept. That's all God's doing with us.
Exactly.
And I think that part of that is we're not parents yet, we're not fathers yet, so we don't see. And think about it, in this generation, if you would have been talking to someone in the first century, if this dude was 15, he might be a father.
Yes.
These people were getting married at 13, 15, 16, in those ranges. Yeah. But now we got people, you could be 36 and still not have kids. So you still aren't in that place where the analogy clicks for you. Yeah. So be patient. I think that's part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, in God's goodness and mercy, like He will literally wait till you're on your deathbed.
That's right. On the cross. And we've both seen that happen.
Exactly. So yeah, and just bringing that up and tying it in, that's a perfect segue. Just talking about dad. I know you spoke about your dad. And,
that's right.
Him not being a believer currently. Yet.
Right.
Say yet.
So yeah, I've had conversations with my dad, and then there was a couple of years ago where I knew he was never really ever interested in Christianity, but we did have a conversation on the way to Longview. We were coming up here to go to a bike shop, and I took advantage. I just thought I just got to be as clear and as it's not about persuasion, because it's what God's going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do wonder sometimes, if God's already done something, am I going to know if I don't say something, if I don't try? I would never know if God had already started to work on him unless I continue to say things that I think I've already said to him. So if you're out there and you're thinking, I've already had these conversations, don't stop having them, because you just don't know.
Yeah, and like it says in I believe it's in Peter, he's not slow as some people consider.
That's right.
He
I know. Here we are thinking, why can't you hurry up?
Exactly.
Like to a God who is eternal.
Exactly.
You're acting as though that he's living within your 90-year timeline.
And he, just in the whole experience with my dad, I was able to see how good God is, and just how he just kept him, man. Like, my dad basically was an atheist, when we were growing up, and y'all would always ask my mom when we would go to church, a few times we went, why is dad not going? Well, he's kind of an atheist because of Vietnam and, different stuff. And he went through he was in a biker gang. He was actually, president of Banditos, international president. And, he got locked up. He did 10 years in the federal pen when I was like 13 or so. Got cancer while he was in there. And so I think that was God working on him, because when he got out, one of the times I spoke to him, he was like, I could feel the prayers working and this and that, so that kind of humbled him a little bit. Yeah. Got a lung transplant, and it's just like, when I worked up, after I got saved, I had a burden for him, kind of worked up the nerve to kind of talk about it, and it just felt like something was holding him back. And, I prayed about it. I felt like, he might have been feeling like, he had did so much wrong through everything he did in life that, God wouldn't accept him. So it's funny, like about a week or two before he passed, we were able to spend a whole day together. And one of the things God put in my heart was to tell him, like, hey, Moses was a murderer. Paul, if he didn't kill Christians, he was responsible for persecuting them. And God still used both of these men. He got real quiet and kind of thought about it, and to where, like, a few weeks later, when he was going to pass away on his deathbed, we were able to, all come down there and be able to pray and say, Dad, just trust Jesus, and him say, okay. Yeah. And it's just like,
how many kids did he have?
Just two, me and my sister. So.
You and your sister. So you're the only boy.
Yeah.
Who's older, you or your sister?
I am.
So you're the oldest child. It's hard. And so people listening to this need to know that it's hard to communicate to your parents. They see you still as the kid. And like, what is this? Not what do you know so much, but it's hard to humble yourself. Yeah. I mean, it might be easier to do it if it was your dad telling you than you telling your dad. So I think that's part of it, right? Yeah. So how great is it, though, that you had a chance to do that, and now you have some some peace.
Testimony, and
Yeah,
and
it's
just
awesome.
the peace, and not even just being sad when he passed, because I know, like,
Yeah.
and and just finding out in the afterwards, that he had Marine buddies in Vietnam that had got saved, they've been praying for him. That I know I had a real godly aunt that had been praying for him, and it's just really been amazing.
That's so cool.
It knocked a lot of the build up around the gospel down to me, to where it's it's so simple. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just like the thief on the cross.
That's right. That's right. And so you might think, well, do I need to know everything in books?
Yeah.
Like, no, of course not. The gospel is the kind of thing you can access immediately.
Yeah.
And then study for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I mean, it's deep and it's available at the same time. So I think that's really cool that you were able to
And
take that step with
and we're definitely praying.
That's right.
So God's working. And man, that's awesome. I guess just to kind of wrap this thing up, since we're talking about apologetics, what would be some books that you would recommend, like, for anybody getting into apologetics? Your books or anything?
Yeah, I think that one of the books, it's like one of my first apologetics books I ever read was well after I was a Christian. I didn't know there was such a thing as apologetics books. But then I discovered C.S. Lewis, and so his stuff. But some people find C.S. Lewis a little bit wordy. I think he's really great, but
awesome.
it's now all Lee Strobel's stuff is really accessible and really easy to read. Also, a lot of the stuff from Josh McDowell.
Yes.
Early on was really powerful, and he's rewritten a bunch of his books with his son Sean. So you can get a lot of good information from that as well. So and also a good friend of mine, Frank Turek,
Frank
has a
Turek's
book
awesome.
called Out of Enough Faith to Be an
Yes,
Atheist, and he has a book called Stealing from God, which is awesome. So these are all guys who I think at the world of, who are writing, and for kind of a cultural apologetics, like how do I deal with what the world is claiming today? I think people like Elisa Childers are really powerful. So yeah, I think there's a lot out there. What's really great about working on any of these platforms, if it's Books A Million or if it's Amazon or whatever it is, almost always when you're looking at someone's book, they'll show you the other ones in the category. And so I think that once you start with something that's accessible, like Frank Turek's book, you're probably going to find mine and Sean's and everybody else are in the bottom stream. So
That's good, man.
yeah, it's helpful.
What would be some books that you would recommend just giving to skeptics? If there are any books.
Yeah, so I think this is the hardest. So
interest.
I'm going to say something to you about that. I know that books do reach skeptics. It's clear they have, and I get people write to me all the time. And so I think that almost any book you would think would help you learn apologetics could also, depending on who the skeptic is, if there's somebody who's like a really high-level skeptic, well, there's people like William Lane Craig, the highest level philosopher of Christianity, who has debated more skeptics than any other Christian probably alive. He's somebody you can point resources to, and he's at reasonable faith. So that's a great source. If he's a scientific skeptic, people at Reasons to Believe have some great materials like Hugh Ross and Fazal Rana. So those are some people to look at as well. But I think a lot of it for us is going to be, if you know a skeptic personally, then take the time to figure out where the objections really are. You go out and research them, and you be the first presenter of response to because it's always the information connected to a relationship that makes the difference. And if you give him my book, well, he's going to get the information, but I don't have a relationship with that person. If you read my book, well, now suddenly you know everything I know, plus you have the relationship, and now you're able to move forward. So a lot of it, I would say, hey, if it's a skeptic, be slow just to give a book. Be quick to read the books that'll help you respond to your skeptical brain.
That's good, and that kind of ties in with something I wanted to mention earlier too, because it's kind of cliche. People say that your life sometimes is the only Bible some people
that's
read, but I think that's a big impact. And even just talking about my dad, the first time I talked to him about me accepting Christ, and he said, "Well, I have seen a big change in your life."
That's right. So and people want that. So it's been called the fifth gospel in your life, and even Bobby Conway, who's a one-minute apologist online, he's written a book called The Fifth Gospel. And what we're really talking about is, what is it about I always am hesitant in the past about that because it seems like our Mormon families behave more like devout Christians than Christians do often, right? And they'll be surprised at any time that the worldview, the theological system you're in requires you to behave well to be saved. You're probably more likely to behave well because it's required.
That's true.
The problem we have is that we know it's the grace of God that saves us, yet that grace ought to compel us to a changed life. But if you know you don't have to do it, then it's easy to fall back into, well, I'm just trusting the grace of God on that one. And I do this too. We all do this, right? So I think that's part of the trick. That's why I want to go beyond just the life you live, because we're going to encounter people. I've encountered atheists that have better moral fiber than a lot myself. Sometimes I'll think, man, I'm not even as good a guy as that guy, and he's not a believer.
Yeah.
So, and I've met lots of guys like that. So I think it's just a matter of us recognizing it's not an either or, it's a both and. You know.
That's good, man. That's good. Well, I think it's been an awesome interview, man, and I thank you again. You know, I appreciate you coming on.
Glad to be able to. Thanks for bringing me out so we
Yes,
can
sir.
we can do this.
This is awesome, man. So, you know, this has been Set Free Radio. I'm your brother Justin, J. Warner Wallace, Cold Case Christianity. You know, check him out, his podcast, all the books. Person Interest is the very newest one, Cold Case Christianity, Forensic Faith, God's Crime Scene. He's got a bunch of books for kids. It's very awesome. So check him out, man, and you know, let him build, let these resources build your faith, and you know, compel you to go out and spread the gospel. And
That's right.
So appreciate y'all tuning in. We're gonna wrap it up with a little bit of music. Grace and peace. God bless y'all.
The Set Free Radio Show. Truth music for East Texas.